Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has disbanded the country's war cabinet. That announcement comes a week after one of his key political rivals, Benny Gantz, resigned from the cabinet. Netanyahu has faced pressure from ultra-nationalist ministers inside of his coalition to be included in the war cabinet. But that move would have added additional strain to relations between Israel and other countries, including the U.S. Israel has also announced a pause in military activity along a route in southern Gaza. The move is set to allow humanitarian aid to move into Gaza. According to a new report, more than 1.3 million people have been displaced from Rafah and parts of Gaza in the past 6 weeks. Joining me now is The Hill's staff writer, Mychael Schnell. Mychael, thank you so much for being here. We have a lot to get to today, so let's dive right into it. Prime Minister Netanyahu has dissolved his war cabinet 1 week after opposition leader Benny Gantz resigned. What was the prime minister's reasoning behind this move? Was it to essentially prevent replacing his seat with a far-right minister who opposes Netanyahu's handling of the war?
Yeah, so Julia, I don't think that this move by Netanyahu came as such a surprise. It was widely expected that he would dissolve the war cabinet after Benny Gantz and then another member of the war cabinet both resigned from their position, both left their position. According to an Israeli official said, according to New York Times, that the move by Netanyahu was largely symbolic to do so after those two officials, Benny Gantz and the other official, left the war cabinet. But of course, this comes as the Israeli government is making more key decisions that it has to do with Israel's war against Hamas, particularly the conversation about a ceasefire. There has been a proposal for a ceasefire that's being looked at by all sides. So sort of as this war between Israel and Hamas drags on, and as Israel has to make more key decisions, we saw those tensions and disagreements within members of the war cabinet. That is now dissolved.
So moving to the war itself, Israel's military announced over the weekend that it will pause fighting along a route into southern Gaza during the daytime, which would allow a backlog of humanitarian aid to flow into Gaza. What has Netanyahu's reaction been towards this announcement, and could this be seen as a possible step towards a ceasefire?
Yeah, Netanyahu not very thrilled, not very happy about this move. According to Reuters, this is what an Israeli official said, quote, when the prime minister heard the reports of an 11-hour humanitarian pause in the morning, he turned to his military secretary and made it clear that this was unacceptable to him, close quote. So essentially right there, Netanyahu denouncing this pause, essentially what it would be is a daily pause of roughly 11 hours along one of the main roads where humanitarian aid is delivered. Netanyahu coming out against this pretty strongly, so we'll have to see how this continues to play out in the days and weeks ahead.
So Prime Minister Netanyahu's upcoming speech to Congress has highlighted really a continuing divide between the Democratic Party. Former Speaker Nancy Pelosi has publicly voiced her opposition to Netanyahu's address, and now Democrats are worried she's making it more difficult for House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries to unify the caucus through this issue. What greater impact could this divide have for Democrats as primaries continue and the 2024 presidential election looms closer?
Yeah, this divide within the Democratic Party, and particularly the House Democratic Caucus, has just continued to plague Democrats all throughout the year, particularly after Hamas launched that attack on Israel on October 7th. We have seen time and time again staunchly pro-Israel Democrats be up against pro-Palestinian liberals who are concerned about the mounting humanitarian deaths in the Gaza Strip. This is sort of all going to come to a head next month when Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu comes to the U.S. on July 24th, to deliver an address to a joint meeting of Congress. We're already hearing a number of progressives who plan to boycott that speech, either not show up or have an alternative way to express their displeasure with Netanyahu coming to Congress. But look, when we talk about this from a political standpoint, well, remember, you know as well as I do, Julia, back earlier this year when there was that Democratic primary in Michigan, there was a large percentage of the electorate there in Michigan that voted for the uncommitted vote, which is essentially the protest vote against President Biden. That was largely seized as a protest of the way he has handled Israel's war against Hamas and his standing with Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. So look, the question now is, will those uncommitted votes in Michigan and perhaps in other states across the country, will they stick with Joe Biden because they believe that former President Trump is a larger threat than Joe Biden, despite his stance on the Israel-Hamas war? Or will they stay home and not cast a vote for Joe Biden, which could be really detrimental to his campaign? So it's going to be really fascinating to see how this plays out. But nonetheless, the bottom line here, Julia, the disagreements within the Democratic Party, not helpful for President Biden as he seeks re-election.
Yeah, a real potential roadblock for him going forward. I want to move towards several primaries that are taking place this week and want to go to the Republican side of the aisle for a second. A notable primary to follow will be in Virginia's 5th congressional district. Incumbent Freedom Caucus member Bob Good is facing pressure from Trump-endorsed John McGuire. If Bob Good loses, he would be the first House incumbent defeated in this year's primaries. Mychael, what are we expecting to see play out in this race? A lot of my sources say McGuire has the momentum right now, and there's some internal polling that shows McGuire up by 10.
Yeah, I mean, this has been such a fascinating race because remember, Julia, Bob Good isn't just a member of the Freedom Caucus. He's the chairman of the Freedom Caucus, which is known to be the Trumpy, ultra-conservative, hardline conservative group within the Republican Party. But of course, Bob Good caught the ire of former President Trump when he endorsed Florida Governor Ron DeSantis in the Republican primary for president. That drew the ire of former President Trump. Now, after DeSantis dropped out, Bob Good did endorse Trump. He even went up to Manhattan to stand alongside the former president and speak on his behalf amid the hush money trial. But that just wasn't enough for former President Trump, who came out and endorsed John McGuire. Look, this is going to come down to the wire here to see who wins. There was a poll recently that showed McGuire leading Good. It was a survey released by the conservative Virginia Faith and Freedom Coalition, which had McGuire up over Good by 10 percentage points. But it's important to note that 29% of the survey respondents at that time still said that they were undecided. So this is going to really come down to the wire. It's going to be fascinating how this plays out. And Julia, not only would this be the first incumbent to officially lose, but it would be the first of the 8, the Gates 8, the McCarthy 8, the 8 Republicans who voted to oust Kevin McCarthy last year, be the first one who's knocked out of their seat after Nancy Mace survived against her primary challenger. So really a lot of different reasons why tomorrow's primary with Bob Good is going to be so fascinating to watch there in Virginia.
Yeah, it's not only a revenge move for former President Trump to endorse John McGuire, but also for Kevin McCarthy as well, because Bob Good was a part of that ouster. So I want to move further out west into Oklahoma. Congressman Tom Cole, who has a powerful role after being appointed to the chair of the House Appropriations Committee, is playing defense in his primary race. Cole has held his seat since 2002. What type of pressure is he facing and why?
Yeah, this is another interesting one. Tom Cole, one of the few remaining members of sort of the establishment wing of the Republican Party who hasn't been swept up in this MAGA wave. He's faced primary challenges in the past. Folks are now saying that this is the one that is most threatening to his gavel. Tom Cole, though, remaining, very resolute in the face of this pressure, saying that sometimes it's not about who has the most money, but it's about who has the most friends. He's saying that he has a lot of friends in the district, him believing he will prevail. But nonetheless, fascinating to watch such a powerful member of Congress. Tom Cole, previously the chairman of the House Rules Committee, just left it in the middle of this Congress to take on the position of chairman of the House Appropriations Committee. I mean, such an important figure in Congress. For him to be facing, a contentious primary is really fascinating. So another one to absolutely be watching come Tuesday.
So moving over to the Supreme Court, the High Court has been surrounded in multiple controversies lately, one of which is the release of secret recordings where Justice Alito can be heard speaking on religion. How are lawmakers reacting to these recordings?
Yeah, there was a report this morning out on thehill.com by our colleague Alex Bolton that essentially looked at how Jewish Democrats were reacting to the secret recordings of Justice Alito. There was one lawmaker who spoke to The Hill who said, quote, "I don't think there's really any doubt. I don't think Alito and Thomas are being shy. They have a view of the world and they're trying to establish an official religion and a specific denomination." Now, this particularly, is significant in the backdrop of the 2022 decision involving Roe v. Wade, that the Dobbs decision that overturned Roe v. Wade, sending the issue of abortion, the question of abortion, back to the states. Some lawmakers raising concern that potentially the justices were looking at this from a religion point of view. So, definitely a fascinating story to watch as it continues to unfold. Just one of the several stories right now that are developing involving Supreme Court ethics.
So, staying with the Supreme Court, a recent Supreme Court ruling reversed a ban on bump stocks for firearms. Now, Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer is planning to hold a vote on legislation banning bump stocks this week. Are Democrats united on this issue, and how are Republicans reacting to this news?
Yeah, this is one of your typical sort of, Democrat Republican gun issue, gun matter issues where we're seeing that split between parties. Democrats decrying the Supreme Court decision that struck down this bump stock rule, the ban on bump stocks, while some Republicans sort of rejoicing in it, saying that it was a bad rule and that it's right that it should be overturned. Look, I think that, in today's day, to get anything done in the Senate is difficult because you still have that 60 vote threshold filibuster, especially when you're talking about something like guns and the Second Amendment, which is so polarizing among the parties. So I think that will end up happening likely is Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer will put this bump stock bill on the floor. Will it reach that 60 vote threshold? We'll just have to see. But let's not forget that's a very high bar to clear in the Senate, especially, again, when you're talking about such a polarizing issue like guns.
Yes, certainly a polarizing issue, and one that Democrats are hoping to make an issue this coming presidential election. And speaking of the presidential election, I want to look ahead to it right now. It was just announced that President Biden and former President Trump have accepted the rules laid out for the June 27th CNN presidential debate. I can't believe it's only, a week away, over a week away. I think one of the more notable rules to mention is that microphones can be muted. How can we expect that rule to play out, especially with Trump on stage? And what else was agreed to?
Look, if it works, Julia, it could be effective, the microphone rule, because as we saw in the first debate between Biden and Trump back in the 2020 cycle, we saw former President Trump trying to talk over and sort of heckle Joe Biden at several different junctures and turns during that debate. So if the moderators do, work with that microphone rule and their mics are shut off, I think that we could potentially see a more civil debate. But of course, this is former President Trump on the debate stage. Nothing can be unexpected. Everything is on the table with him. So whether or not it's effective, we'll just have to wait and see.
So leading up to the debate, the Biden campaign launched a new $50 million ad campaign that targets Trump as a convicted criminal. How effective will this ad campaign be, and which states are they targeting?
Yeah, so this is an ad campaign, as you mentioned, more than $1 million that will go towards media that's trying to reach Black, Hispanic, Asian American voters. Those are the key targets here. That'll be highlighting Trump's conviction. Remember, 34 felony counts on falsifying business records as part of that $130,000 hush money payment made out to adult film star Stormy Daniels. It's going to air this ad buy on general market television and connected TV on streaming devices, in addition to cell phones in battleground states and national cable. So it just shows that the Biden campaign is sort of ramping up their messaging and their advertising as we get closer to November. And of course, trying to make some sort of gain on this federal conviction that came against the former president just last month.
So I want to move to some new polling released by USA Today that shows support among Black voters in Pennsylvania and Michigan for Biden has declined from 2020, I should say. How big of an impact could this have on the election this November? And will we see the Biden campaign shift its strategy to put more effort into regaining support in these states?
Yeah, I mean, it could be huge. Black voters are always a very important contingent when you're talking about elections, but particularly in this election, any contingent of voters is going to be so important because as we've seen in all these key battleground polls, as we've seen in the national surveys, Biden and Trump are just so close when you look at all of these different polls that any small sliver of voters that are undecided or flipping from one side to another could make a difference because we're talking about such a small margin. So I absolutely think that we'll see the Biden campaign sort of try to shift its strategy to try to regain support in these states because, again, any little sliver of support they lose could be detrimental when you talk about their race for the Electoral College votes in the White House come November.
So independent voters are obviously set to play a big role in November, as they usually do. And a recent poll by Politico found 21% of independents saying they are less likely to vote for Trump after his conviction. While we haven't seen his conviction sway Republicans very much, could this end up being a deciding factor on who is elected when it comes to these independent votes?
Yeah, I mean, I absolutely think so, Julia. Look, it's still early, of course. We're only about 5 months away from the election, which doesn't sound like a lot in the grand scheme of things when we were working with 4 years before. But I mean, as we know in politics, things can change overnight. So I think that there's still a lot of time. But again, gets back to what I was saying before. As these national surveys and these battleground state polls show, this race is just so close, no matter how you slice it, no matter how you look at it. So any contingent of voters that are either on the fence or switching from Trump to Biden or Biden to Trump, that could be a determining factor because we're talking about such a slim margin. It really all comes down to the adage, Julia, every vote is going to count and matter in this election.
That's certainly true. And Mychael Schnell, what a marathon of topics today. You got through them all. Thank you so much for, we hit it all. We hit it all. Well, Mychael, thanks as always for joining us.
Thanks, Julia.
According to new data from the Guttmacher Institute, more than 171,000 patients traveled out of state to receive abortion care last year, underscoring the impact of state abortion bans following the overturning of Roe v. Wade in 2022. The data showed over 1 million clinician-proved abortions took place in 2023. Of those, 171,300 involved out-of-state travel. Travel for abortion care has more than doubled since 2019, according to the Guttmacher Institute study project, which estimates the number of abortions in each state without a total ban. The new data also reveals a trend of patients in mostly southern states with strict abortion laws traveling across multiple state lines to receive that care due to lack of access in their home states. And get ready to brace yourselves. A record-breaking heat wave will sweep across the Midwest and Northeast this week, with temperatures expected to reach well into the 90s. The National Weather Service says the heat wave will potentially be the longest experienced in decades for some locations. Record-breaking temperatures are also expected as heat rises to levels normally only seen in July. Tens of millions of people will be affected by the heat, with humidity playing a major role driving up the heat index to the low 100s. Let's stay hydrated, everyone. And that's it for today's Daily Debrief. I'm Julia Manchester. Be sure to like, share, and subscribe to the Hills YouTube channel. And come back here soon for the intersection between politics and policy.